Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from Apocatastasis, an Institute for the Humanities, an alternative college and high school here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. I've lately come down from the stacks here at our college library. Your tuition dollars at work. And before I return to the books, I would like to explain certain principles of our dear institute. And to do that, I want to, on the screen share, bring up our fine website, which you can find here on BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, and Odyssey in the description. And if you go to the tab, Our Philosophy, you'll come to the section we're going to look at briefly here, and that is the 4 principles of Apocatastasis, the 4 communities whom we serve. And this is in a very specific order. From top to bottom, the dead generations past, then scholars, then students, and then the general public. I'd like to go through those now and then conclude with some odds and ends in terms of grasping the enormity of this work and in terms of perhaps indicating if this school is right for you or not. So let's look at our first bit here. The first community whom we serve, first and foremost, is the dead generations past. And by that, we mean the corpus of knowledge and the discussions of the past and the discipline itself. And this has always been the thing that we've protected most out of Apocatastasis. Often this gets mauled in different ways, and perhaps in the future, as I've spoken in the past, I will talk about how that happens. But oddly enough, in many schools, the academics and the sanctity of the intellectual process is done violence one way or another. Anyway, the dead generations past, the academic discipline, first and foremost, is our telos. After that, we exist to provide a haven for scholars. A great deal has been done, and has been rightly done, addressing the inadequacies in modernity, or post-modernity, or super-modernity, wherever it is we are, of educational institutions vis-a-vis the student. And these are insightful. But what we often forget is that the field of education, of formal education, is one that does not do much service for scholars themselves. And perhaps understanding that we exist primarily for the academic discipline, we might say that modern pedagogy actually wars more violently against scholars than it does students. And so we are a haven for scholars, and we must protect academic integrity, academic autonomy, and creativity of the instructor only after our first end. Then we do exist, certainly, to provide a learning environment, and please God, a very good learning environment for the student, but it must be done in the proper order. One of the places where schools have done violence to the academic discipline has been the adoption of a lot of consumeristic language. And it's not uncommon to see schools saying things like, we exist for the students, or a few years ago, it was rather trendy to say the teacher works for the students. Well, I'm here to report that at Apocatastasis, the teacher certainly does not work for the student. And the student doesn't work for the teacher, but rather we get back to our fundamental telos, the academic discipline. So yes, number 3, we do exist to provide a very good learning environment for students, but shorn of a lot of the expectations and slogans of consumerism. And so that requires a certain degree of humility. We say that the teacher is a beggar at the door of knowledge towards our first end, and the student ought to take the same humility as well. The student at Apocatastasis comes as a beggar. And finally, we get to our fourth telos, our fourth end, and that is the general public. A college has an obligation to society. It has a political end. It does not have a partisan end, but it does have a political end. It does have a status, a stature, standing. How's that for assonance? It does have an absolute role, not just a role by right, but by obligation to society. And so that looks and concerns our fourth end, the general public. And we do a number of works towards that end, towards the enrichment of the general public. Why? Because a self-governing society needs people who are engaged in a life of the mind. So those are the four ends of Apocatastasis in their proper order. The dead generations past, we say the academic discipline. Then the protection and germination of the teaching vocation. Then students, finally, the general public. A few closing remarks here on this introductory video, and that is when one considers the state of society, particularly culturally, interpersonally, socially, things are far gone as I see it. They're profoundly far gone. And only a decent understanding of history and of related disciplines, in particularly the humanities, can give one such an appreciation. But hope springs anew, and it is part of the vision of Apocatastasis for the total elevation, or as our name means in Greek, restoration of society. Because when one looks at the social animal in all of its facets, you cannot get very far until you realize how much the way we are taught and we teach affects the subsequent society. So Apocatastasis is fundamentally a generational project. It is, in the biggest meta sense of our ends, it is the biggest project to enrich the cultural soil so that another generation after us can build on it. One will never understand the work here in Connecticut. One will never understand the breadth of the work, some of its quirks, its oddities, its day-to-day grind, and all of the things we've been doing all these years. One will never understand this except to understand that telos of teloses, the enrichment of the culture so that another generation can build upon it. Finally, Apocatastasis has an interesting row to hoe in the sense that we are, please God, taking the best from two worlds. That is to say, we are taking the best from formal education, the best from, if you like, industrial education. If you want to be a little bit badly behaved, we're taking the best from John Rockefeller education. And there are good things there, and they are very much worth preserving. And we're doing the same also from a much more amorphous part of the pedagogical world, and that's the alternative educational world. We're taking the best from there. But we're also making a critique of the mainstream, and in our day-to-day organization, our philosophy, not just on these points, but you can go to our website and see the other ends. We're also making critique of alternative modalities as well. And briefly, I would say that the strengths of formal education, as we've noted over the last century, century and a half, the strengths have to do with the interaction of many ideas in a single place, the formation of a space, of an actual learning space, and the popularization of that. The discipline that this requires, the daily discipline, these, we would argue, are some of the great strengths of modern formal education. Some of the great strengths of the alternative, often approaching topics in a very creative way, a way that isn't, in fact, necessarily fostered by the mainstream, questioning critiques, questioning things, and that has to do with how um, industrial education is formatted, particularly on the college level, where there's a lot of peer review, so it tends to create a certain herd mentality in thinking, right? In the alternative, there's a little bit more adventurousness there. And also, there's more of a perception, as a general statement, of the student, the teacher, beyond simply their academic life. Perhaps we could say that mainstream ed, in all of its grades, and we include tertiary education, they have excised man into simply being a learning creature, at least as far as their time during the school day is concerned, right? And there's more of a consciousness of a holistic integration in the alternative. In terms of critiques, what we hope at Apocatastasis to address in terms of the mainstream is perhaps, again, the depersonalization of it, the systematization of it. And if that's fun to say out loud, it's even more fun to spell. Systemization of it, the hijacking, if I could be so bold, of formal education for ends other than knowledge. Got that? What would be the critique of the mainstream? I would say there are two. Insofar as an alternative to college has arisen over the decades, which is not very much. Apocatastasis isn't quite a unicorn, but it's a sparse field of alternative colleges. I would say that the predominant fault is a certain sensationalism without context. There's a lot of interest in the nooks and crannies of knowledge, or the nooks and crannies of history or something, and the most salacious details, oftentimes without the larger scope and the context which the formal education would give. There's oftentimes, in fact, a hostility towards mainstream sources, which does not do the alternative very good. And then on the grade school level, on the homeschool level, there's a huge topic that I'll simply introduce here, and that is, it's, as I see it, largely a product of consumerism, and it takes all of the assumptions of consumerism with it. And in no uncertain terms, uh, do I say that that cannot exist at all at Apocatastasis. And that is, as I say, a very big topic, but a lot of the kind of service sector mentality that exists in homeschooling uh, is not coddled at Apocatastasis. So we do have an interesting road to hoe, but it's a very interesting time in education, and it's actually one that a lot of pedagogues in the classroom and in the college and in the think tanks, I think, aren't really grasping. There's a huge upset coming to all education a lot sooner than people realize. It's happening already very fast over the last 5 to 10 years. Anyway, that's it for now. This is just an introductory video concerning some of our principles and where we're coming from. And I encourage you to check out our website. And also, if you're inclined towards studying in this fashion, to attend some of our open events. to audit a class, perhaps to try out our subscription model for a while just to get to know us. And then if there's a more serious engagement after that, we can meet, you can meet the other staff members, and we can talk about how your course of study will go. But for the moment, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention and your interest in Apocatastasis, an Institute for the Humanities. Masalama.